It's my pleasure to invite Renece Brewster up to the stage to lead a panel discussion. Renece is the co-founder and CEO of Visual Domain, and she's also one of our managing directors at Girls in Tech. Now, something you may actually not know about Renece is that one of her best friends is an incredible 16-year-old girl. I should note at this point that Renece has a 16-year-old girl of her own, and it is not her. It's my 16-year-old girl. They actually talk more regularly than I talk to either of them. I'm not offended, not even a bit, really. Actually, I am, a lot. Anyway, the incredible Renece Brewster, everyone.
Right there, and can I tell you, if at 8 a.m. you get a message saying, Renece, I hope you have as a wonderful day as you are, I mean, it just makes the day. Like, she's beautiful human. Speaking of beautiful humans and awesome humans, I have some awesome humans to welcome up to our panel. Let me introduce them in no particular order, because I have no idea what order they're going to walk on stage. But, I've got an order here. I'm going to mix it up because it's written differently on my piece of paper. We've got Jeremy Meltzer, who is the founder and CEO of iEqualChange, an online platform that makes it simple for e-commerce. I reckon all come up. Just let's come get cozy. To help NGOs addressing key social and environmental issues. Fun fact about Jeremy, he started his career making olive oil in the Yarra Valley, haven't we all? Selling the proceeds to sales towards UN Women. So a social entrepreneur for a very long time, Jeremy, in the blood. We're also joined by the amazing Brianna MacDonald, right there, founder and director of the CareCo, an EdTech HealthTech startup teaching kids aged 5 to 12 mental health habits in the classroom and beyond. I mean, if we can't see the need for that, my God, what good work she is doing. Fun fact about Brianna, and all three ladies that join us here on the panel I've just discovered are all from Canada, so that could be my job done. But she is also been the marketing manager for this conference for Girls in Tech. So volunteer on the side as startup founder, so thank you, Brianna. Next, we have got the amazing Heather Morrison, co-founder of Bumpin', who have pioneered the world's first accessible sex toy. You are literally bumping the barriers that stand in the way of sexual pleasure that everyone should have access to. Now, if a fun fact ain't starting a sex toy company with your brother, I just don't know what is. Like... She's just nailed it right there. And lucky last, but by no means least, we have got Sarah Mack, co-founder and CEO of Folktale, a video platform enabling insights at speed from diverse voices in your world. And fun fact about Sarah, like Ironman triathlon, like so much we'd need to talk because I've just run a marathon and that was enough, let alone the rest of it. But who knows what a BlackBerry is? Oh. A few people over the age of 20. Cool. While on a training run, riding a bike in Canada, she came across the founder of the BlackBerry. So a little interaction with a tech founder very early on while riding a bike in Canada. Love it. Now, these are all very special humans because they are all founders of businesses. And I can attest to the fact, if you are a founder of a business, these four people have pretty much dedicated every single thought, whether they're awake, whether they're asleep, whether they're relaxing, whether they're doing anything to their business. It has completely taken over their world, and they have opted to do that about some incredible impact causes that are bigger than all of them and making the world a better place. So hats off to you, because I know those highs are high, but my God, those lows can be lows. It's an isolating journey and you are all killing it. So well done for that. Now this, I really want to make sure this is totally yours. We've only got 30 minutes with these amazing humans. So if you have got questions, please do not hesitate to raise your hand and ask them. Equally, all of our amazing virtual attendees, just pop it in the Slack channel and someone, I assume, will holler at me with your questions and we'll make sure that they get asked as well. But I will kick us off. Jeremy, maybe I'll start with you because you're closest to me. Now, creating a career dedicated to a good cause, there's probably a few ways you can do that. I don't know if founding and starting a business is necessarily the first one, but maybe tell me through your journey. What was it, the career you wanted, or was it the idea that sort of sparked it all?
It was really about the impact. So there's kind of two quick stories which bring it together. I lived in Havana when I was 21 for about 4 months, and I saw a lot of violence against women. I was confronted by it. I had a girlfriend there through which I met a lot of the community, and every story from her girlfriends and friends and family, every woman had a story. And I remember thinking, what the hell is going on that these women think it is the most normal thing in the world, such that that's just what men do. So that sparked me on a journey to kind of understand, or begin to understand and learn about gender, about how enormous this global issue is. And of course, it's an issue in every country around the world. We almost lost in 2004 my sisters in the Boxing Day tsunami. And for 5 days, we didn't know if they had survived or not. And then we found out that they were alive. We got them out. And I met an Australian who was the head of comms at UNHCR, and I said to him, look, I've had these experiences. What do you think how can I help? Because I feel this is what I need to do with the rest of my life. And he said, look, you can do one of two things. The next time there's a humanitarian disaster, you can go and donate your time in a refugee camp or in a shelter or do something. But of course, it's only going to make, an individual amount of impact. Or build a business, find a way that you can bridge worlds between the business sector and the NGO sector so that you can create sustainable growing funds. And as soon as he said that, I knew that that would be what I had no idea how, and we're still working it out. But I knew that I wanted to find a way to use the power of business and the principles of business to unlock that flow of capital and new funding for the NGO impact sector.
I love that. What an incredible kind of build up to lead you to where you are today too. Sarah, maybe I'll throw to you next. Have there been times where you found yourself, like obviously video, I feel like I can speak to that a little bit. It can go so many different ways. How have you managed to maybe even say no to certain opportunities because they're not committed to that cause and that bigger purpose that you're trying to drive?
Yeah, thank you for that. So I think video is the medium that we currently use at Folktale, but what I'm really passionate about is storytelling. So stories are the way that we understand our world. That's how we've been listening to all of the great narratives coming through today's conference. It's how we remember things. And so right now, what we look at is, at Folktale, how do we actually listen to the stories of communities through the medium of video? And when we're thinking about that, we're looking at programs, organizations globally with the most wicked problems who aren't listening to program participants, to the actual folks that benefit from that. And so going back to your question, we did have some opportunities, and we're still a startup. We're really small, and we're still growing, and we do have our values and the profit for purpose that we're building. And I did have an opportunity once to potentially work with a potential customer that was really interested, and it was in the tobacco field. And we thought, looking at some of the work that they were doing, I really looked under the hood. We were like, is this the right opportunity? And we decided that wasn't the right opportunity, right? Now, naturally, you're like, obviously, that doesn't align with the values. However, at the same time, given the stage of company that we're at, we have to be very careful with the types of customers that align with us and that we align with them. But in the future, because we discussed this with our entire team, a conversation around what is good and how do we actually provide the impact. And we said, if some of these big companies are willing and ready to listen, there's a level of readiness, then we should work into some of the nastiest companies in the world to shift their narrative and start listening to that. So we're not there yet. We said no, but at the same time, we are looking at the progress of organizations that may be ready in the future.
No, that's awesome. Heather, maybe I can jump to you. So saw the lack of, I guess, not even accessibility, but lack of anything for disabled people in the sex toy industry. How did that just kickstart? How did that, I guess, identification start to, well, I might as well just create one?
Yeah, so my younger brother lives with disability. He's got cerebral palsy. He's a motor wheelchair user, and he's dedicated his life to, I guess, blowing out the taboo that sits around sexuality and disability. He started by being one of the first disabled people who was featured in a magazine around body image, and this was over a decade ago, and at that point, body image wasn't nearly as big of a thing as it is today in terms of a place in culture and in media. And so he's basically dedicated his life to changing the narrative around sexuality and disability. As part of this, he was the feature of a documentary a few years ago that talked about his journey. And within that, he talked about how when he was younger, he had been able to self-pleasure, and as he got older and his disability increased, his ability to self-pleasure was reduced. And I don't want anyone to get any sort of misconceptions. We didn't have the type of relationship then where we talked openly and honestly about our own masturbatory habits. I don't know if you guys have different relationships with your siblings, but that wasn't part of our conversation. And so one day after watching the documentary, I was like, Andrew, I'd never thought about it, even though we grew up together, and most people haven't. Fair enough. And I said to him quite naively, why can't you just use, if you can't use your hands, bummer, but why can't you just use a sex toy? And he's like, if I could use a sex toy, I would just use my hands. They're both predicated around being able to have fine motor skills, mobility, being able to sustain emotion for long enough, et cetera, et cetera. And I said to him, well, so there's nothing out there that's been designed for people with hand limitations, mobility issues, disabilities. And he was like, because of his work, sex toy companies would often send him things to test, and 9 times out of 10, he's like, I can't get it out of the packaging, let alone actually use it. And then when I do use it or try to use it, it's so inaccessible that I actually have to wait for one of my aid workers, to the one that happens to be open to sexuality and disability, to be on staff to help me set it up. And he's like, it's a whole thing. And so he's like, it's easier for me just not to bother, and most of the time I just can't. And I said to him equally as naively, do you want to change that? And he said, I think I do. And since then, we've been on this ridiculous mission to try and bring this to life, which has been met with all sorts of ups and downs, very many highs, very many lows, as you would imagine.
The roller coaster is very real. I've just got to keep asking, but how has the response been to the joystick so far?
It's called the joystick. So the one thing that you get out of this company is there's always a chance to make a joke, or there's so many puns. And we do have a laugh, and our brand tone of voice, because a lot of the content in and around this space is quite sterile, our brand is very much playful and trying to imbue more of that positive side of sexuality, so that it's not coming with a sort of white coat and clinic. So our first product is called the joystick. We have an ethos at Bumpin', which is nothing for me without me, which means that everything that we do is designed and co-created with our community. And so we've done a very tight design thinking process in terms of every single time we make a massive iteration, we actually prototype and test that, get feedback, working with the disabled community and also with occupational therapists and other clinicians and people who are on the front line who can provide input into what those designs need to do and achieve.
No, well done. Please remember, stick your hand up. Would love to hear your questions. But Brianna, mental health in schools, such an important education piece and conversation to be having with kids. Tell me, how have you, because I know you've also gotten funding, how has maybe that funding journey allowed you to either stay true to the cause, or have they had, your investors wanted you to go down different paths at times?
Can I just point out, there's so many Canadian accents on this stage. I could hear you speaking, and I was like, oh, that's quite nice. So we are a SaaS company, and I started working on the idea about almost 4.5 years ago, which is wild. I know there are certainly other tech products where you can go to market or take a prototype out to market right away. And we weren't in that space. We needed to be an evidence-based product. We're working with very young people, some as young as 5. The margin for error in the classroom is less than 0. So there was a reason why we definitely spent a lot more time on backstage, if you will, building what we wanted to build to go to market. And so I would say we were about probably 2.5 to 3 years in We had come up with a really strong product offer that was in prototype stage, which I was able to build myself, and I was very proud of that, but it was also saving $1. There's no way around it. And when we started talking to the wider community, I should say, about what we were working on in the product, this was stepping outside of our industry and niche. So it was no longer just the education community or the pediatric psych community or the disability support community. It was everybody else. Other tech founders, possible investors, certainly parents and guardians who have very young people, just gaining the interest level in what we had designed up until this point, now that it was strong enough to start to show people. And the response we got from the community right away, I admit, was quite validating. Now, what's quite interesting about the product is we started building this well before COVID was even an idea. And I worked in a very niche space. I worked in the trauma-informed education space. So even though I knew it was a very prevalent problem, certainly the conversation around very young person mental health was not a mainstream conversation before COVID. And if nothing else came out of that whole situation, if we're looking for a silver lining, is it brought very young person and childhood mental health to the forefront. It's a much more mainstream conversation now. So that worked in our favor. And by the time we were taking this prototype, this idea, this entire business model we had pulled together, and we're meeting potential investors and other industry partners, the level of validation was so strong that it was actually for the first time, like I said, almost 3 years in, we were like, maybe this doesn't have to be a bootstrap startup. Maybe we have the opportunity to go down the fundraising and investment route. And what has been so extraordinary is the investors that we do have now, which I feel very appreciative to have backing us, is not only are they all, the ones we end up working with, they're so value aligned. They know exactly what we're working for. They can see the light at the end of the tunnel. They're like, this product does this. That's the world we want to exist in. We will fund this. Is everyone we've met with, whether it's a mentor, an advisor, an investor, has sought to better and grow the product, but never change it from the core mission. And that is bloody fantastic.
You've picked the right investors, clearly.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Jeremy, you identified the problem. You knew you wanted to work on it. What advice would you have for others who maybe see that they too want to impact or, support something, but maybe are not in a leadership position or quite ready to take the plunge into starting their own business?
Well, I mean, there's a lot you can do from, supporting particular charities that you're passionate about. I mean, I tend to think the conversation needs to really reveal the extent to which all of us as consumers are wanting to shop businesses that reflect our values. We're wanting to shop purposefully, where we know that we're living in a really critical time. You don't need to be a scientist to know that anymore. And therefore, every decision we make can make a difference. And so businesses now are actually scrambling to catch up because suddenly they've woken up and realised, oh shit, my consumers care. And product and profit is no longer enough. So if you're working in a business that is not aligned with your values or is not doing anything yet, now's a time to say, look, you know what? I actually want you to do A, B, C, D. And businesses are looking also to accelerate their sustainability, to give back to the community, to find ways in which they can authentically meet those expectations from consumers. So, I think one of the most powerful things we can all do as business owners and as employees as stakeholders in that effectively supply chain is how do we apply the pressures necessary, how do we raise consciousness of leadership to make this a priority? Because we literally have about 8 years now before we reach certain tipping points, and may happen even earlier as far as climate impacts. And of course, the impact on refugee outflows around the world and women and girls bear the brunt of that globally. We're seeing these problems grow exponentially. And so leveraging that power of business and capital, regardless of what side of the fence we live on, can be one of the most powerful ways that we can unlock capital and move the business sector into a whole new model where product and purpose becomes the new normal.
Oh, amazing. Any questions? Da, 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 da. Sarah?
Hi.
Storytelling, hearing diverse voices, I mean, great cause. How does tech pull into it? What has tech allowed you to do to amplify maybe some of that?
Yeah, great question. I might take one step back and I guess share how I got to tech, because I'm a non-tech founder. So it's really humbling to be immersed amongst a lot of technology experts. So I come from international public health, which I think finally public health everyone understood when the pandemic came. And as part of my role prior to becoming an entrepreneur, I used to travel like a fly-in, fly-out to a lot of countries, emerging markets, and I was looking at behavior change, particularly in malaria and bed nets, right? So behavior change, and it was fantastic. Going into communities because the research says sleep under a bed net. If you're a woman and you're under 5, it will save your life. So great, research says this. All of the companies are shedding lots of money into the problem. Go into communities, I'm sitting with them, the people that are benefiting from the bed nets, and they're like, I'm not using them. Not using them. I said, why? And they're like, because I need to feed my family. I'm covering my vegetation. I need to fish with it. I need to make wedding dresses so I can sell it to survive. And there's so many different reasons. So I'm sitting with communities and listening to their stories. And that's not scalable. That's me trying to go back and be that conduit and saying, this is the report, tick, 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 quantitative data. We have distributed this number. So the power of storytelling is where it kind of moved into the next phase. And I've been an entrepreneur for about a decade now. So looking at bootstrapping and then starting to build technology because of the scalable nature of the voices. So prior to this, a film production company worked with global brands like UNICEF and DFAT and talking about humanizing the wicked problems they have around the world. So we almost like our team traveled. And it's great, you know, you've got some beautiful documentaries and stories that can be told, but ultimately, after a while, there's an ethics of who's responsible for sharing that story. There's an ethics behind the fact that there's about 7 billion mobile devices globally, and the Gates Foundation said that mobile devices are most powerful in the hands of the poorest women. And so if we can hear the voices of these women that's associated with, you know, with the actual challenges that they're actually part of or they're benefiting from, what does that mean for the change and the decisions and the systems? So tech is the enabler of that in order for us to scale voices and make it easy for people to contribute if people are ready to listen.
Yeah, amazing. Heather, maybe a similar kind of question for you, but a bit more broadly. Like, what role do you see technology playing in addressing accessibility issues more broadly?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think that accessibility issues in tech have kind of always gone hand in hand. When you look at the telephone, when you look at the keyboard, all of these things, all of these inventions, all these technological things that have now become completely ubiquitous and are used by all were developed initially because they were trying to solve a problem from an accessibility standpoint. And I think, you know, when we look at the world today and just look at the numbers, we often think in our heads, particularly if we're not living with a disability, that disability is quite of a minority. It's marginalized, but actually disability is the biggest minority in the world, and it's 20% of the population currently. You know, that's growing as we become an aging population. I once had one of the disabled consultants we work with called me a tab, which was temporarily able-bodied. I've never, ever forgot that. So, you know, he basically just reminded me that we're all potentially, as we grow older, going to either have times when we have a temporary injury that leaves us with less ability, or potentially will incur some form of disability later in life. And so I think, just to come back to the question, like tech and disability and accessibility actually really go hand in hand. They always have, but I think it's looking at it from a universal design. How can designing for everybody actually improve the world for all of us? And also not to remove ourselves, because right now, if you're living without a disability, you're living a certain type of privilege. And that isn't something that we can all bank on, and it's not something that we can rest on our laurels on. So the more I think access we can look to give for everybody and think about design with technology, with innovation as being universal. And that's definitely coming. We're seeing far more platforms start to think around accessibility and making sure that it's something that everybody can access. The more we can do that, the more we're not just serving ourselves today and the disabled community today, but we're actually future-proofing for all of ourselves tomorrow. So the joystick is not a totally selfless endeavor for me. I want to be able to know that I can have orgasms later in life.
I love it. And a totally different frame to put on all of our perspectives. We've got a question. Go for it.
So the question was in terms of data and how platforms or companies capture that in order to be able to make decisions. Exactly right. Yeah. But very quickly, we don't supply devices, right? So we work with organizations and they know their communities and their world. We're looking at qualitative data. Qualitative insights are coming through and not quantitative. And so that's through the voices and the telling and showing and the visual data that's often missed in a lot of the capture. So we work with, I guess, not to be too technical, like we capture it through different features on our platform, but we work with research evaluation monitoring teams, and they do have like a methodology, and Folktale is often a method that's often incorporated into the data capture that we do from a qualitative perspective. And then there's additional kind of layers to unpack that further, but yes.
Did anyone else have anything to add?
I can add.
Yeah.
So we definitely have both qual and quant that feed in. No big surprise. Disability-related data is not there's not a massive amount out there, and when you overlay any sort of sexuality on top of that, it becomes very minuscule. So we've always had to look at how we can capture data ourselves. We do a lot of focus groups, user testing, et cetera, as I've mentioned, so a lot of qual as well, which we go out and source and work with the community. But then we've also been really lucky to partner with larger sex retailers like Lovehoney. They've got access to much bigger databases than we would, and we've been able to run quant research through them to understand a little bit more around like the needs, the demographics, who's potentially interested, et cetera, and to take those learnings and start to apply them to our business.
Amazing. We've got less than a minute left, so I'm going to ask you all a question, which I'm totally putting you all on the spot for. But one piece of advice you wish you had known when you first started, like what would that have been? Just you starting the business, what do you wish someone had told you?
I'm happy to answer that. I'm in the health and wellness space. So admittedly, this is my second business. First one I started up in my early to mid 20s. And I'm really happy this is my second venture, because in my 20s, putting myself first and my mental and physical health and well-being first was not the priority. And everything is better for it. The work is better, the product's better. I think I'm probably a better person. So if you're starting a new career, a new skill, a business, you have to get yourself sorted first, because that strong foundation will be the layer on which everything else can succeed.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I agree with that. Of course, it's sometimes hard in practice, I find, and I agree with what you said. Like living and sleeping, it's true, and it's actually quite sad that, I'm in the shower and I'm like, shit, I'm trying to fix that problem in my head constantly, and first thing I go to wake up with it's not entirely healthy. So I think there's two things. A is creating balance, of course, as much as you can, and also knowing your why. Like, if you're going to do anything well is bloody hard, right? Like, we all know that. And so you better know why you're doing it. Because in times where I never feel like giving up, but I feel like, shit, this is hard. And then I think, I'm really glad I know why I'm doing it. Because, I got back from Cambodia recently. I'll be in Papua New Guinea at the end of the month, working directly with our NGO partners. And I'm very directly reminded of the impact we're having by helping fund these NGOs. And that's the fuel for me, to come back and deal with all the business stuff, which, has to be done. And to learn, to manage a growing team and all those skills I definitely wasn't born with. So, play to your strengths, work out what they are, work out what your zone of, not only excellence, that zone of genius that only you can do, and as much as you can, operate in that space so that you can unlock, the fact that we can all sit here and have this conversation. We are privileged, relevant to many, many communities around the world. So how can we use that to be of service in this really really urgent time.
In our tab state. Yes. That's right. Can everyone please join me in thanking this amazing panel of founders for their insights?